I'm now delighted to introduce award-winning author Geoff Dyer. The New Yorker hails him as a restless polymath and an irresistibly funny storyteller, adept at fiction, essay, and reportage, but happiest when twisting all three into something entirely his own. And it seems fitting that both Walter de Maria and Geoff Dyer defy easy categorization and are prolific in several genres. Born in Cheltenham, England, and educated at Oxford, Dyer currently lives in Los Angeles and serves as writer-in-residence at USC. His book, otherwise known as The Human Condition, a selection of essays written over a period of 20 years, was awarded the 2011 National Book Critics Circle Award for Criticism. He's also the recipient of the 2015 Wyndham Campbell Prize and a Lannan Literary Fellowship. Publishers Weekly says, Dyer's writing does what the best critical writing always does, encouraging us to view, read, or listen closely to art, literature, and music, as well as to pay close attention to various cultural forms and their impact on our personal lives. And this was precisely my impression after reading Dyer's latest book, White Sands: Experience from the Outside World. It showcases his adventures and misadventures across the globe, including both delights and disappointments. They range from retracing the footsteps of Paul Gauguin and searching for the artist's notion of paradise, to a series of disillusionments in Norway while on a quest to see the Northern Lights. He nearly freezes to death, he wipes out while dog sledding, his camera freezes, and only on the plane ride home do these elusive ethereal whooshes of green iridescence make their appearance in the night sky, but on the opposite side of the airplane that he and his wife are sitting on. My favorite chapter in White Sands is the one in which Dyer, his wife, and friends, by the way, one of whom includes the famed actor and art collector Steve Martin, when they experience De Maria's The Lightning Field in western New Mexico, where the only way to visit is to reserve a cabin on the property and stay overnight, allowing you to experience the 400 rods at different times of day and in varying degrees of sunlight. Dyer's writing is beautiful, poetic, and visceral about his experience there, and it made me want to prioritize this as my next road trip, so I'm very eager to hear more of his insights about it tonight. He ruminates on the meanings we assign to the destinations of our pilgrimages, what a certain place and a certain way of marking a landscape means. He explores the power and attraction that certain places hold for us and what we seek in them. Amidst the fast-paced frenzy of life today, I think it's all too easy to check off a destination on our bucket list without fully letting our experiences there seep into us. Dyer's writing and approach to travel has reminded me to slow down and soak up the essence of a place and to write down my impressions and memories in the moment. I also look forward to seeing the fruits of his current labor, a book in progress entitled The Street Philosophy of Gary Winogrand, which will be published in early 2018 by University of Texas Press. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Geoff Dyer.
Thank you. Thank you, Caroline, for that lovely introduction. And for someone of my age, if you saw the podium being raised like that, there was a real hint of Rick Wakeman about that, I thought. It was very, very nice. Okay, I think this evening, I loved that, hearing Stockton play the drums. And I really enjoyed listening to Gavin, and I'm almost impatient for my own bit to end so that we can talk about all this stuff. And I think that Gavin's presentations and mine will go together quite nicely, because what I'm going to do is not really say much at all about Walter de Maria's The Lightning Field. What I am going to do, though, is sort of describe some of the things going on in my life, some of the things that really made me so receptive to it, so responsive to it. And this will, I think, rather than describing what's going on there, it'll be a way of introducing some of the themes and feelings that converge there. And I should say right from the outset that I came to Walter de Maria's work really not at all through the art world. And I think this will itself be an interesting kind of thing of convergence. I'm going to start with this picture of a land formation just outside the little town in the Midwest where I grew up. Yeah, we've got our Midwest too. It's just rather smaller than yours. The little town I grew up in Gloucestershire, there was this area, a hill, really an insignificant hill in kind of mountaineering terms. It was called Leckhampton Hill. And there was this formation called the Devils Chimney. And, you know, with a name like that, that just suggests, doesn't it, that it exists outside of the ordinary. And that was reinforced by the way that whenever you began walking up the hill towards this place, there was a sign saying, "Beware adders," you know, suggesting that we really were getting into that mythical terrain of the devil, who was, of course, famously manifest as a serpent. And as you can see, I mean, you know, it's not the Grand Canyon, is it? But you know, when you're a kid, this kind of thing, it doesn't take much to imbue a place with some sort of spectacular grandeur. And here's a photograph of my uncle, who's now in his 80s. And according to family legend, when he was a teenager, he climbed the Devil's Chimney. And I always thought this was a real sort of Hillary and Tenzing-like achievement. It was only after the book came out that his wife, my aunt, sent this picture. I thought they'd been photographed standing on the summit, exactly like Hillary and Tenzing. But in fact, they only got this far. That's the sort of documentary proof. But it's further, that's proof they didn't get there, but it's further proof in a way that actually, you know, we really were in the realm of in the mythic, you know, that it wasn't, they didn't literally ascend to the summit, but in family lore they did. Okay, so that was, you know, that's Cheltenham in Gloucestershire, the Devil's Chimney. Not a very big deal, but a very big part, of course, of one's consciousness growing up in England is of these other ancient marks on the landscape, such as, most famously, Stonehenge. And, you know, this is Britain's most famous kind of primal piece of land art, or whatever you want to call it. And, you know, it exists not only in and of itself, but importantly through its endless cultural manifestation. So this, of course, is a painting of Stonehenge by Turner. And, you know, it really does loom so huge in one's consciousness because, for example, it's where Tess of the D'Urbervilles ends up in Hardy's novel, and you really feel its amazing kind of primal power in Hardy. And those of you who have read Tess of the D'Urbervilles, interestingly, will remember that when she goes there, she says, "Listen, can you hear? It hums." And apparently, before it became completely denuded, there was a particular kind of sound that these standing stones created. I'm from England. I'm no stranger to disappointment this means. And it really is, I mean, of the great kind of primal attractions, I don't know if you've been to Stonehenge, it's pretty disappointing. Partly because in their kind of attempts to preserve it from being ruined by hippies gathering there for the summer solstice or whatever, the tourist industry, they've just, you know, a road, a big highway runs right by it, completely diminishing its scale. And really, it's a real shame because I feel this photograph by Kenro Izu really captures the kind of power that places like Stonehenge have. Kenro Izu's photographs really served as a kind of advertisement. They lured me to all sorts of parts of the world, exactly in the way that photograph of the lightning field was, of course, designed to lure us there. Here's another of his pictures from his series Sacred Places. And this is a good, important warning for us all. I mean, the Stonehenge, it's been there for ages. The lightning field looks like it's going to be there for a long time. Here we see a site of Roman antiquity in Syria. I've been fortunate enough to go there. But it's a real reminder, actually, these places that have been around all this time, they remind us, actually, that we're not immortal because, I'm really glad I've been to this place in Syria because, I don't know when we'll next have a chance to go somewhere like that. Here's another photograph of Kenro Izus, this time of a place that you can still visit. It's in Java, Borobudur, where some of you may have gone, may have visited. And I think it's important to remember about these places, these sites. They're not just places. They're places that depend on some sort of relationship with us. And we feel their power even if we don't share their faith. And I think this was expressed very beautifully by W.H. Auden in his poem from 1950 called In Transit. He says that somewhere are places where we have really been, dear spaces of our deeds and faces, scenes we remember as unchanging because there we changed. And it seems to me one of the things that I've always been looking for when I've been traveling is not just to see in a sort of ticking off the box kind of way, not just to be able to say that I've been to Borobudur, which I have been to, but sometimes you go to these places and they represent real kind of turning points or punctuation marks, let's say, in your lives. I want to now go back to my childhood. I've talked about we've mentioned a place like this. It's in a remote part of the world, Java. But I grew up surrounded by other kind of sculptures, other kind of marks on the landscape, because really my childhood was so dominated by the memory of the First World War. All over Britain, you would, in every village, however small, there would be some sort of memorial to the dead of the First World War. And actually, it's something that is absolutely sort of intrinsic to growing up in Britain. But one of the remarkable things is if you're in Australia or further afield in New Zealand, you really do see that it was a world war, because all over the Australia and New Zealand there are these memorials. This is one by Charles Sergeant Jagger. It's at Paddington Station, which was the station that we always went to, that we always arrived at when we went to London. But the key thing that I really need to emphasize is these statues, this thing of the past, of the First World War. It was all around. There was a real sense of the past being there in the presence. And the epicenter of this, if you like, in London is the cenotaph, designed by Sir Edwin Lutyens, and built as a way of giving some sort of expression to the unimaginable catastrophe of the First World War. This is a picture, I think, of the temporary cenotaph, and I think it was taken in 1918 or 1919 when the army marched past as a kind of tribute to the missing, to the dead of the First World War. And here's another photograph, I think from 1919, a really extraordinary thing. For a start, it's in color. And I mean, what's going on there? So if you think of that previous picture, when we've got the soldier, this long line of soldiers marching past as a tribute to the dead. Here, what's happened, because of the long exposure time, that central sort of river that we've got, that's actually that is a column of marching soldiers. So you've got this real sense of that which is absent being being manifest. And throughout the 1930s, there was just this huge project of memorializing the dead of the First World War, building memorials, creating, if you like, the construction of memory. And here is the next slide. It's not a technical mix-up. This slide is, in fact, this image is in a way the central one of my whole presentation, because that phase of commemorating the dead came to a kind of climax with the inauguration of the memorial at Thiepval, also designed by Sir Edwin Lutyens, in 1930, I think, a memorial to the missing of the Somme. Now, this battle, the Somme, is so central to our collective memory, and it's a memorial to the 60,000 dead whose bodies were either never found or bodies that were unidentified. And when I, like many people, I had a great urge to visit the cemeteries of northern France, of the Western Front. I didn't really know what to expect. And I came across this memorial, which I'm deliberately not showing you a picture of because it's unphotographable. No photograph quite manages to express the incredible power that this place has. And you go there and you just get this real sense of something both emanating from this memorial and converging on it. And I would say that of all the experiences that I'd had leading up to the visit to the lightning field, this was the crucial one because it made me conscious that what I'd been looking for, what I was interested in always, was places where time has stood its ground. And if you think of the Devil's Chimney, I mean, that was a place that had stood its ground in a way. But perhaps more explicitly than that, it was a place where, it was a place in the landscape, it was a place commemorating this important battle. In other words, it was a place where the temporal was manifested in the spatial, or, if you like, a place where history was manifested or imprinted in geography in the form of this amazing memorial with these huge letters, the missing of the Somme. And there it was, that which was missing, these people who were missing, whose bodies were never found, was there permanently inscribed in the landscape. And the idea was to imbue the landscape with memory. But also there was something else going on because you're there and there's a sense in which it's not just that, there's a sense in which the memorial kind of draws you, makes you conscious of the fact that maybe, just maybe, you know, the landscape itself is remembering. There's a sentient quality to the landscape there. And I'll make mention now of a couple of other things sort of like that. This is a photograph by Chloe Dew Matthews from her series Shot at Dawn. And, okay, you've got that Lutyens, the official memorial to the missing of the Somme. This is a different kind of memorialization in the form of a photograph of a completely inconspicuous, although really quite lovely looking piece of the French landscape. It's one of a series of photographs that Chloe Dew Matthews made of places where soldiers were executed basically for desertion, although of course it's now become apparent that a lot of these soldiers who were convicted at court-martials of desertion were suffering from what was then called shell shock. And so what she did, she went to the exact places where they had been executed and took a photograph at exactly the time of day that the execution took place, so that the landscape acquires this memorial quality through being photographed. And I'm not sure whether she was influenced by, but to me it seemed to be exactly the same kind of, a very similar kind of undertaking to one that I think many of you will be familiar with. That is to say, with the photographs, the wonderful, incredibly moving, powerful photographs by Joel Sternfeld in the series On This Site, Landscapes in Memoriam. And he takes photographs of these places which don't look particularly significant in themselves. And then on the facing page, there's a piece of text explaining what happened at these particular places. And that explanation changes our sense of what this place is. And it means that again, the photograph becomes a kind of memorial. In this case, this is on the site of what used to be Bryant's grocery store. It's where Emmett Till talked fresh to a white woman in the Bryant's grocery store, and then of course was so brutally killed. And so it marks pretty much the beginning, the atrocious beginning of what becomes the civil rights movement. And I like this idea of places and the extent to which they do or do not contain memories. Here's something to show that the process is still going on. Here's a pretty, it's a reasonable picture, a nice sort of couple of tourists and their nice doggy looking at this place. It's a photograph by the Thai photographer Chaiwat Subrasam, taken in 2014. And the reason that these people are taking this photograph, and the reason he's taking the photograph of them, is because this was a site, the place where two British backpackers were murdered. And so I think the interesting thing is the idea that, 20 years from now, will that place, will it have that kind of, that power of something? Will there be that sense of something converging there? Will there be that sense of something emanating from it in a way that is very obviously the case when you come to this, very this official memorial that we get at Thiepval? I think when I'm visiting places, so often, I mean, what I'm sort of conscious of, it's like I am sort of some sort of human Geiger counter, if you like, and I'm always alert to, you come to a place and I feel that some sort of clicking is I'm aware of a kind of radioactivity or a particular power that some places have. And I think it becomes even more interesting if perhaps you don't know why it is that a place has that power, because presumably 30, 40 years from now, the story won't be so well known. And needless to say, I'm not the only person to experience this. Here's a painting made by Elihu Vedder, done in 1863. In other words, during the American Civil War. It's called The Questioner of the Sphinx, and it seems to me this painting, which I came across randomly actually in the Boston Museum of Art when I was wanting to go to see a different painting which wasn't there. And it seems to me to express so clearly what we go to certain sort of certain marks in the landscape for. I mean, I talked about that idea that I have this sort of Geiger counter-like thing, and you can see that he's been sort of guided to this place and wants the Sphinx to reveal its secret. And I want to bring things up to date and to move things into the realm of art. Something else that was a hugely important part of my life during the years when I went to Burning Man in the Nevada desert. And I think it's quite interesting. We've been talking about these places such as the Thiepval Memorial to the Missing. Obviously, it's built to last. The interesting thing about Black Rock City, where Burning Man takes place, is that it only comes into existence for a week and then it vanishes again. But bear in mind this idea that has been so important to me about the manifestation of the temporal in the spatial, the idea that you can have sort of some sense of time marked on the landscape, and the layout of the temporary city of Burning Man always takes the form of a kind of incomplete clock face, with right at the center there is, so frightened of this clicker. Oh, there it is. Yeah, there's the man at the centre. And if you and I, if Gavin and I wanted to meet, at a particular time, we'd say, yeah, I'll meet you at 10 o'clock, which is there, or maybe it would be 2 o'clock there, and there'd be another, the radial streets would have some different thing. But there it is. It's this temporary thing takes the form of a clock face. And I should say also that although Burning Man is always, widely known for the sort of for the kind of Dionysian frenzy of the burning of the man, there's also that important thing, the burning of the temple each year, which is a much more solemn affair, and which is a way of, it's a weird thing. It's a way of memorializing people's, providing a focus for people's grief. But the key thing is that this temple is built absolutely not to last. It's assumed that it's going to go up in flames. We'll move on now to some real art. So this book of mine, White Sands, the 2 chapters that are most relevant to tonight, take the form of 2 visits that we make to Robert Smithson's The Spiral Jetty and Walter de Maria's The Lightning Field. And for me, I think this is quite a picture like this really does reveal that, you come to this kind of thing and you can approach it via art theory, and you can talk about land art and minimalism. But I think you only have to see that to feel that, oh my God, actually a much bigger context is needed. I mean, doesn't that strike you as being having something in quality with these sort of prehistoric sites? And it seemed to me that just the kind of the scale of time that they were addressing was so huge. I mean, the remarkable thing, particularly about the Spiral Jetty, is that it started to look so primal, so prehistoric, so soon after it was made. And although, of course, we can, Smithson was never retiring about explaining what he was up to in his work, I think it's really, it would be so interesting to me, I thought, to come to this place not knowing what it was. I sort of imagined myself almost as a visitor from Mars, trying to work out what this place was. And I feel that a picture like this really does show its kind of incredible primal power. And it's a complete vanity thing, this. There's me at the spiral jetty. And I think this picture as well just really, I mean, doesn't that look like something that's, just something, it's like not so much a work of art as some archaeological marvel that has been uncovered. And as many of you will know, I mean, what happened is that Smithson built the spiral jetty at a time when the water levels at the lake were unusually low. So he built this, this remarkable thing. And then when the water levels returned to their normal high level, it promptly disappeared. So I love this idea, picking up with some of the themes we've mentioned, that the thing that people visited, it wasn't to be seen. And I just love this idea. I'm sure there are certain art world purists who say that, okay, yeah, you can go to the spiral jetty now, but the time to have really visited it was when there was nothing to see at all, and you would just get this kind of felt absence of things, a pure sort of emanation of its invisible power. And then, I think we'll wrap up soon, and Gavin and I will talk. We come to, the lightning field. And in the chapter in the book, I write about this, again, really trying to remove all the kind of context that I could. So it takes the form of a kind of rather implausible story where myself and the 5 friends who were staying there, as though we just stumbled upon this place, like visitors from the future, after maybe, this will hopefully, unless for some reason, I mean, God knows anything can happen in the next 4 years, I think it's likely that that the lightning field might well outlast us. And I like the idea of sort of trying to, just as we are always keen to try to interpret what it was that actually went on with Stonehenge, was it really, as people claim, a kind of druid version of a calendar whereby the arrangement of stones was tied into some sort of astronomic movement of stars or this kind of stuff. So if we came to this place, what would we make of it? What sort of explanation would we have? So the piece takes the form of this kind of just this series of where we sort of measure what's going on. We count the poles, and then we see, as Gavin was saying, that it's a mile by a kilometre, and try to work out exactly what's going on there. And it seems to me that it appealed to the same part of me that the memorial to the missing of the Somme did, in that there was it seemed to me to be about time, partly because it's, of course, it's assuming it's going to be around for a long time, but crucially, I think because, again, as was mentioned, this wonderful decision was made by de Maria that you couldn't just turn up and have a quick look at the lightning field, take a picture, and then go away. No, he was absolutely insistent that you had to. It was 6 people at a time, and you had to stay the night. And that was great because, as I'd said at the beginning, being British, having sort of, disappointment in my DNA, I think it's not at all unusual for you to turn up at the lightning field. You're dropped off there at about 2 in the afternoon, and it's pretty disappointing because with the sun directly overhead, the poles are very nearly invisible. There's almost nothing to see. I mean, goodness knows lightning is very rare, but at least here in this picture you can see the poles very clearly. But when you get there, there's almost nothing to see. And then gradually, as the light changes, the poles do become very definitely apparent. The way they look changes all the time. And then for me, and I sort of realized that there were 2 things that were going on. One, it was an experience of space unfolding through time, because it's so crucial that you spend the night there, an experience of space unfolding through time. And also I realized that although, of course, I loved that, that sculpture of the temple for the Buddha at Borobudur, but it seems to me that, of course, we can, however vehemently one might be an atheist, still, we're all conscious of that, God-shaped hole in our lives. And it seemed to me that this was such a completely kind of secular version of the kind of experience that people used to have when they were confronted with, when they arrived at, say, a church somewhere in some maybe quite bleak part of the Scottish Highlands, let's say. And I just really, I just felt that it had this, that when I was there, I was experiencing, I really didn't feel I was having an art experience, is what I'm saying. I felt it was something much more primal than that I really felt I was in receipt of some kind of, to put it oxymoronically, some sort of secular version of a variety of religious experience. And I've got a few more pictures that I can show you a little bit later about other pilgrimages, but I think that's it from me now, and so it's going to be me and Gavin duoing. Thank you.